My name is Andrew Macadam. I'm the Managing Director for Microsoft for Startups here in Europe. I'm going to try and do something I've not really done before. We do something called an accelerator in a day. We also run a scale-up program where we run a course over 16 weeks. I was given the opportunity here in TechBBQ to do it in 30 minutes. So I'm going to try and take you on an accelerator in 30 minutes. And then I got told, actually, Andrew, you don't have 30 minutes, you've got 25 minutes. So I'm now going to try and do it in 25 minutes, which is going to be challenging. So who am I? I've been in Microsoft 7 years. This is actually me on my final day in my previous company. And it's not because I was so unhappy in the previous company I'm jumping for joy. It was the opportunity in Microsoft. Microsoft has been through quite a few changes over the last years. In Microsoft for Startups, what we're here to do, you're here to do great things, and we're here to help. And that sounds a bit twee, I know, but it's actually core of exactly what we're doing. And the aim of this presentation, really, is hopefully to give you these insights based on feedback from people that have been through it. It's also based on a lot of stuff that I read. I read a lot. So what I want to do is hopefully make this practical, give you some ideas, give you some frameworks that you can use, and ultimately get some feedback from you as well. So, why can I stand up here and do this? You work for Microsoft, Andrew. Yes, I do. And the interesting thing is, 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago, we had quite a big change in the business. A gentleman by the name of Satya and Adela joined, and with that came a fundamental change in our organization. And I think this is one of the key things. I was having a few conversations yesterday. I don't know about you, but TechBBQ has been absolutely fantastic. They've done an amazing job here to get such a diverse range of businesses and perspectives, and all of us coming together. And the interesting thing was, from Microsoft's perspective, we needed to change the direction that we were moving in. In the past, let's be honest, we've probably been known as fast followers. We actually came from a culture that was, dare I say it, maybe a little bit know-it-all. And one of the key changes that we made, and that Satya's made, is actually moving from this know-it-all culture into one that wants to learn an awful lot more. We now call ourselves learn-it-alls, because we have the opportunity to engage with people like you. Hit Refresh actually is Satya's own book about this change, and it's something that's become really core to the business. And one of the key things that really we've changed is about curiosity. Does anyone know this book? Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck? Yeah, a couple? As I say, this is going to be a bit of a reading list as well, but one of the most critical things, one of the key things that I've certainly found when engaging with startups is curiosity is absolutely key. So much so that you had my details at the start of this. That was my email, that was my phone number, that was my Twitter. Did anyone actually see the other one? TrueBlue1010? Do we know what that is? It's actually my gaming tag in Xbox. I know, it's really sad. I'm a proper geek. But anyway, so you can even game with me as well. But the curiosity from my perspective is, what can I do to improve this? So I'm going to go through this, and I'm really going to have to start speed up because I just realized I've got 25 minutes, and there's a lot to get through. But at the end of this, there is a genuine offer. I will show my details again. Come and tell me. I'm going to be on the stand over there as well. Tell me, what can I do better? So, one of my favorite authors, Simon Sinek. Who's read this one? Come on, there's got to be more in the audience that have read this one. Start with why. Because what do? We start with what. We start with how. And I worked in a part of the organization before that was all about the what. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? We didn't really start with why. If you start with why, it completely changes the perspective of your business. It actually starts adding value, starts adding impact. And this is feedback we've had from, we've got somewhere in the region of 3,000 startups going through our program at the moment, and consistently starting with why is one of the best places to start. But do not forget, seek feedback. There's an interesting acronym, again, from one of the startups who's done this, a similar kind of presentation, ABCD. Any ideas? What do you think it might stand for? Oh, someone always said ACT. Oh, okay. So always be customer developing. And yesterday, actually, I've been working with the guys here in Copenhagen, the Health Tech Hub. And Jesper very kindly introduced me to Cerebrio. And this is a great example of seeking feedback and customer developing. couple of years ago when they set up, they were very focused in a very specific area in the health tech side of things. And what happened was they rolled it out. They started working with hospitals. And what they realized was, from a peer perspective, they were getting amazing feedback. Everyone was like, do white papers, do more research. It's absolutely incredible. But as soon as they started engaging with their customers, what happened? They worked out very quickly, they weren't going to pay for it. It's great to get that recognition from your peers, but ultimately, you're a startup. As Bob talked about, generating revenue is absolutely critical to what you need to do. Here's another great book. Who's Business Model Generation? Business Model Canvas? Everyone talks about Business Model Canvas or Lean Canvas or something equivalent, yeah? And I say it's a great place to start or continue. So although I'm here to talk about Microsoft for Startups and talk to your startups, actually I've used this in so many roles personally. I've used this with probably over 500 startups since I've been doing this as well. And that's why it's also a great place to continue. Because the key thing about this is, when you're thinking about business model generation, it could be down to your small team. It could be down to a business unit. It could be down to the strategy of an organization. And if you use this really well, you map where you are now, where you want to get to, the deltas between the two, and then you use that as your roadmap to act. What's really interesting when I do this with the majority of startups, I thought I was actually going to click onto the circle. I was going to say, where do you think they normally focus? They normally focus on, what do we have? It's normally the resources, because that's where an awful lot of the inspiration comes from. The thing is, we always find the gaps in the value proposition. Why are you doing it? Let's revert back to Simon. Why? Start with why. Are you really clear? And can you really clearly articulate what that value is to the customer audience that you're going after? And if you can, and then you still find there's maybe some gaps in how you're going to do that, do I need partnerships to really enable that? What's the cost of doing it? And ultimately, what's the revenue that we're going to drive to offset those costs? That, in a nutshell, is the business model canvas. But what we tend to find is unlocking the value proposition is one of the critical parts of what you need to do. Out of that book, there was a spin-off book called Value Proposition Design. Now, this is normally something that we do as about an hour and a half on our accelerator in a day. It's something we do a full-day workshop as part of our program. I'm now going to cover it in about 60 seconds. Really, the key of this is, very essentially what it comes down to is, do you understand your customer? Do you understand the customer's pains? Do you understand what it is they're trying to gain to ultimately do their job? How are you actually developing something? How are you creating to relieve the pain and enable the gains with your product set? The way that you do that, honestly, is in your value proposition. It's really about being able to articulate it really succinctly and really clearly to the audience you're trying to engage with. So when we look at this, when we look at the pain relievers, what we try and do as well is we actually try and come up with a 3-word tagline. Now, I don't know if anyone's tried to do this. It's an interesting experiment. And to be honest, there's as I'll say with all of this, there are some that will say this is brilliant, and there are some that will say don't waste your time. And ultimately, the way that we found this really useful is it forces you to take a step back and actually just have a think. Am I really clear on my why? Am I really clear on the value that I'm driving for my customers? And if you can do that, it's going to make a substantial difference. And this is, as I say, probably one of the more interesting areas, because if you, after this session, go up to someone, see within 10 seconds whether you can articulate clearly what your business does. We talk about elevator pitches all the time. It's not even really about that. One of the first things you do, ask the person what they do. Then can you articulate your value in a way that makes sense to them? So yesterday, if you want a 3-word tagline, I'm going to try and, who did I meet yesterday? Blue Banu. There was Camilla and Sarah yesterday in Blue Banu. I don't know if you've seen them. They're just over there. If I was to do a 3-word tagline for them, it would be reverse engineering plastics. Okay? Because ultimately, that's not something that anyone can own. You could go down this sort of generic route, but ultimately, They are very specifically reverse engineering plastics. And interestingly enough, they both articulated it straight away. They did a really strong pitch, literally in seconds, and I knew exactly what they were doing. That's the kind of insight that you need when you're talking to your customers. So, you've got your business model, you've come up with your value proposition, but really, how do you bring that to market? Now, I was head of digital in my previous company. I wish I'd read this book, because honestly, what do we do really well? If we find something that works, what do we tend to do? We tend to do the same thing over and over and over again. So you've got your product, you understand how you want to articulate that value in the market to your customers. Read this, it's fantastic, honestly. 19 routes. And the key thing about it as well is it's not saying that if you find something that works, you should stop doing it. What it is saying is, if you find something that works, maybe if you try something else, it might work even better. It's about being quantitative about how you actually engage with the market. And ultimately, once you find those different routes, when you find the things that work, it's all about scale. I talk about us being Microsoft for startups, but really where we bring our core value is in scaling up. It's about engaging startups into the Microsoft customers globally. It's about scale. You might be doing really well nationally, but how are you going to do it internationally? I'm based in Ireland. Similar to Denmark, we can't rely upon our national market to be a large organization in the same way that potentially you could, let's say, in France or Germany. We rely upon that international growth. So scale is absolutely critical. And that's where we try to add value as part of our engagement. The key thing as well is, when you do this, you start looking at your activities. You start actually working out whether you're nailing your customer segments. Am I going through the right channels? And then the question at the end of it is, do I need partners to be even more successful? Selling. Now, Bob did a huge talk about selling. And the really interesting thing about selling is this. How many people in your organization think they don't sell? Is there anyone, actually, here you go. Anyone here thinks they're not a seller? Hand up. Okay, I'm actually quite impressed, because I guarantee there are some people going, well, I'm in the IT space, or I'm finance, or I don't sell. Have a look at this book, okay? Everyone is a seller. To sell is human. But what do we have? We have negative connotations, don't we? What do we think of when we think of salespeople? Car salesman, second-hand, you know, bit of a wheeler dealer. Know what I mean? But that's not what a seller is. A seller should be someone that's able to articulate the value of the business to people that they're communicating with. Everyone in your business has an opportunity to do that. So make sure, as we've already said, what the value prop is. But you know what? The value prop as a developer might be quite different to the value prop of a CFO, of a CEO. And that's why doing that work at the start, making sure that everyone's clear and consistent on that, makes a massive difference. Caveat emptor. Do we know this? It used to be buyer beware. It's now caveat venditor, seller beware. Because everyone that you deal with is way more informed than they've ever been than in the past. Social media, reviews, word of mouth. Word of mouth is no longer word of mouth, it's word of internet, let's be honest. There are so many different ways now that people can communicate. They are far better informed than you realize when you walk in and actually try and pitch what it is you're doing. Beware. Be prepared. But the best news is, as startups, as scale-ups, you normally have way better insight into what they're trying to do, into those pains, into those things that they're trying to overcome, than big companies like Microsoft. So you have an opportunity to genuinely differentiate yourself. And for those people in the room that don't think they're sellers, have a look at the two questions here. If the person that you're selling to agrees to buy, will their life improve? And when it's over, will the world be a better place? Sound like lofty goals, don't they? But suddenly it doesn't feel quite so bad if you're selling to someone, if that's the output of it. Now, the next one's really interesting, because negotiate. So you've done your business model, you've done your marketing, you've got it out there, you've engaged with people, it's gone really well. And now it's time to actually close the deal. And this is one of the areas where we find so much challenge with a lot of the startups. because they might not have been in that situation where they're actually closing deals. This book, Getting More, Stuart Diamond, absolutely fantastic with regards to just giving you a framework, giving you that, I think there are 16 questions that you ask at the end of it, broken down into four blocks. And it's really about understanding at which point you need to compromise, because that's a huge part of the negotiation. Which point do you compromise to ensure that you're actually driving your business forward? And ultimately, what's it going to do? It's going to help you close those deals. It's going to generate revenue for you. What it'll also do is help you determine, do I have the right resources in my team? Because you know what? It's not easy closing deals. And again, it'll make you answer that, or ask that question, do I need partners to be able to do this? So, we've just done business model, sales, marketing, closing, now the tech. So this is what I describe as tech everyone should know. Normally we call it tech a CEO should know. It is a whistle-stop tour of technology, and the IT in the audience will be laughing at me as I go through this, but I will endeavor to cover this as quickly as possible. Essentially, one of the first things to actually really think about is business continuity. So what do we mean by that? Who knows about composite SLAs? No one knows one? Okay, a handful. Okay, cool. So the interesting thing about this one is, when it comes to how you build your solutions, how you architect your solutions, what happens? You have lots of different components. You might be getting them from lots of different providers. And everyone talks about 99.99. So what happens when you start adding up lots and lots of 99.99s? The interesting thing is, when you actually look at the contract that you've given your customers, did you just go for the lowest one that you've got at the moment? You go, oh, we've got one at 99.9 with that provider. I'll put that down in my contract. The reality is, it's not that. The reality is the difference from hours to days when you start adding up composite SLAs. So from a continuity perspective, the promises, the commitments that you're making to your customers, check them out, because you will be held accountable and you will not be managing the customer experience. Scale. We've talked about scale in a number of ways, but scale from a tech perspective, great questions that you need to be asking. Scale is more than just what would happen if we doubled. I mean, that's the problem of plenty. That's a wonderful problem to have, don't get me wrong. And I genuinely hope it's a problem that you all experience. But what happens when you need to turn stuff off? Are you still getting those economies of scale? When you're thinking about the comment I made earlier on, you're in Denmark at the moment, or maybe Sweden or Finland or wherever you are around Europe at the moment, and you're thinking, actually, I want to go into new geos. How easy is it going to be to scale into those areas? A great way of looking at it is break it down to its component parts. How much does it cost per person, per customer, that actually, or per transaction as they go onto the platform? And if you do that, it gives you a way better idea of exactly where you are. Recovery, disaster, what happens if it all goes horribly wrong? And again, really important questions to answer. This is something your architect should be looking at. Have we actually architected this solution with failure in mind? Again, the composite SLA comes into play. But the RTO and the RPO, so think about this. How quickly do we want it? And at what point do we need to go back to? Because you know what? You can get all your SLAs up to 99 point all the nines. And you can basically have it so that everything is instantly back up. But what happens? The cost goes through the roof. And really, are you adding that much value back to your customer? So really think about why you're doing it. Security sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But I've heard this a number of times as part of a security team doing the presentation. And they say there are two types of companies. Those that have been hacked or penetrated, and those that just don't know that they've been hacked or penetrated. And I know that a lot of you will be looking at this going, oh no, not us. You know, we're very secure and we've done everything that we can. But the interesting thing about this is, right now, it might be dormant. But there will be a point. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, is here with the intent of becoming the biggest company, the best that they can be in their space. And that will make you a target. That will make you vulnerable. Look at these questions, answer them. Ask your CTO. Or if you're the CTO, ask yourself, have I answered these questions? One of the most common mistakes that we see, people go, oh God, I've got to pay extra for the help desk, for the support. I'll just take the standard. I'm sure the standard's fine. And then when that hits the fan, what happens? Why didn't I take that? It's happened in some of the most successful startups because they were scaling, and suddenly they're based on transactions. The transactions go through the roof. Something they architected was incorrect, and they needed that help. And what happened? They lost half a day. The impact of that you cannot underestimate. So please make sure you are looking at your help support. And then finally, from a technical side, the architecture. So I've been mentioning this the whole way through. The interesting thing about this is we sometimes confuse architects with developers, and sometimes they can be both. But think about this in the traditional sense. What does an architect do? They take all of those component parts, they look at all the different aspects, and they're the ones that bring it together. They're the ones that actually make it that building. The developer is more like the bricklayer, or the glazier, or the electrician. Now, as I say, that's not always the case, but it's absolutely critical that someone is looking at the entire architecture of your solution. This one is always one of the more interesting areas, and again, I feel as though, and it was I met Bob yesterday, and Bob said, it's always very difficult. We had a great conversation, and we found that a lot of the things that we talked about were actually very similar, which is why he decided to give me a hard time before he came on. But the interesting thing about this is, when it comes to getting funded, there's a couple of things that we recommend. First of all, and I think it's the same in Denmark, there's a lot of funding that's available that really takes very little out of your business. Is that right? Is anyone here using like the government and the support through various? Yeah. Okay. Use it. They tend to actually want to do it for the right reasons. They really do. Also, try and understand, one of the key things, one of the key areas that we look at is, how can you actually use revenue to bootstrap your business, to actually drive that, so that even when you do start looking for support from VCs, there's actually an opportunity to get significantly more value from your business and give up significantly less of your business. Because ultimately, we don't want to give it away. You guys are working too hard to do that. There are two things. Russell Banks set up a company called Investor Sheet. It was the aim of this was actually to engage with VCs and give them much better clarity of the VC's investment directly, so they would actually see the full balance sheet live of their investments, of their portfolio. He interviewed over 1,000 VCs, and there are lots of answers to this particular question, but what do you think the two things were that VCs looked for? Two decision criteria. Were you generating revenue? Were people actually paying you for what you were developing? It was actually one of the key things that they looked for. Obviously, what they would then also look at is, what's the addressable market, and what's the forecast, and what's the growth potential? But if you were generating revenue, that normally would give you a foot in the door. And I'm sure everyone knows what the second one's going to be. It's the team. Every time, this was the winner by a country mile. They look at the team. What's your background? What's your experience? Where have you come from? Have you failed before? Have you succeeded before? And you know what? Sometimes they're as equally as important, depending on the industry and the sector that you're looking to target. Sometimes you have to fail before you succeed. But what was really interesting was this was categorically the most important thing for all VCs, which is a lovely segue into building your team. I think one of the key things is, I presume we've got founders in the room. Yeah, I thought it'd be one or two. The question is, have you really asked yourself, what is the core value and the culture that I'm trying to engender in my team? Because ultimately, those first key hires really determine the shape and the speed and the direction and your business. And think about recently, I think in the last couple of years, I think we've been exposed to what happens maybe if the culture isn't quite right in certain organizations. Because again, you want to scale, you want to be the biggest out there. The first people that you hire are critical to how that business is going to be run. Think about your own personal traits as well. Are these some of the traits? And look, we could list about 50. I just put a few down that certainly we found to be really important. And the one at the bottom is quite interesting. I had to put this in. I think there's been a few discussions actually in the last couple of days around bias. Bias in AI as an example. We're developing bias into things that have been in the AI space. The interesting thing about a personal trait of bias, though, is there's something we talk about an awful lot within Microsoft, which is unconscious bias. You're not aware of your bias. When you look around your table, do you notice that? Have you hired the right people to help with that unconscious bias? So, how do you get the right people? There's another great book. It's called Sales Acceleration Formula. The sales acceleration formula is actually based on recruiting salespeople, but ultimately there are 4 principles behind it that translate anywhere. How do you hire them? What's the process you use? And again, it's a great format, great framework to use on it. How do you train them? So what's the process there? How do you manage them? And then the final piece, the 4th element, is actually how do you generate leads? But honestly, the leads bit is interchangeable with, for example, how are you developing and growing them? You can swap the 4th one, because that is very specific to sales. But if you want a really strong framework around how to bring people on board and remove some of that unconscious bias as part of the process, it's a fantastic book to read. So, Aer Lingus versus Ryanair. Who would work in Ryanair? Oh my God, no one? Okay, Aer Lingus, you probably don't even. One person, thank you. So the thing is that you could put anything up here. You could say, I don't know, Lufthansa versus, you could pick any business. But what was interesting is, even when I threw that up there, I guarantee these were the thoughts that went through your head. You were thinking, what's the proposition? What's the experience? It's one of these things. Employer branding is critical, and it starts when you start. Last, and certainly by no means least, this is one of the things that ultimately also helps us with our unconscious bias. There was a panel earlier on today that was talking obviously about how we ensure about diversity and inclusion. And I think it's one of those where, from my perspective, I've been involved. I'm on the Diversity and Inclusion Council in Ireland. I've actually been responsible for promoting and bringing in neurodiversity into Microsoft. And it's one of those things where just being aware of it, really thinking about it, and ensuring that what you're doing is actually bringing this into the process when you're looking at your team ensures that your business will be more successful. Equality is absolutely critical. The most successful startups we see always have a balance. It is never one type that's in there. It is a mix of a team that makes the team successful. And if you want some ideas, how do I be more inclusive? Definitely. This is just 10 simple things that you can do, that you can think about to be more inclusive in the way. And one of the things I love is making a habit of asking questions. You'll have seen I'm endeavoring to ask 400 people questions even as I go through this. It's rather challenging. But if you make it core to what you do, it's something you'll find again and again. It's much easier. So, to summarize. Okay. Yeah, no, there is definitely no summary. That was genuinely drinking from the fire hose, as we say. That was me downloading a ridiculous amount of information with a ridiculous number of books. And if you want more reading books, then let me know, and I have a full reading list that I will happily share with you. But that's, the idea of this is hopefully, regardless of whether you're a startup, a scale-up, maybe you're a corporate, maybe you're a VC, hopefully what you've got from this is just a bit of an idea about what we're doing, what you can do, and some questions it's definitely worthwhile asking. My biggest challenge is the fact I am consciously incompetent. I know I don't know a bucket load of things, and I'm aware of that. So I'm constantly trying to learn. And what I'm also doing is making sure that we work with great partners. This is just a few ideas. We genuinely, we're looking at underrepresented founders, we're looking at ethnicity, we're looking for equality, and it's a big part of what we're doing to ensure that we're getting the best startups out there at the moment. And what we do in the startup program is it's all about connections. It's all about enabling you as a business. So, suggestions. Follow me or Microsoft for Startups Europe on LinkedIn or Twitter. Because then you'll get an idea of how we take 30 minutes and make it a day, or how there could be an opportunity for you to actually come onto the program. As of yesterday, we didn't have this organized. literally, I've been walking around. The feedback we've had has been so overwhelmingly positive with regards to engaging with us. We're actually going to come back on the 27th of November. We're going to run an event. We're going to do an accelerator in a day, where hopefully you'll be able to hear from a few more people rather than just me for half an hour, to learn a little bit more about what we're doing and potentially adding value to what you're trying to do. Feedback. Tell us where we should do one next. If you want to join the program, feel free. We're on a stand just over here, so literally just on that side. You can sign up or register your interest for the day and have a chat with us. Rachel, who's stood at the back, will also be there. I started off saying be curious. I'm curious. What can I do better? What did you find useful? I'll take praise as well. I don't mind. But what I'd rather have is constructive feedback on what I can do to improve this, or what Microsoft for Startups can do to enable you more as an organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, amazing.